This movie made me feel like I was back in the 90s again.
What's up, everybody? So, this is my review of The Rip, written and directed by Joe Carnahan, starring Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, Stephen Yen, Tiana Taylor, Kyle Chandler. This was one of those movies, I heard mixed reviews about the movie, to be honest. But when I actually sat down and watched the movie last night, I was just so happy. This is the kind of movie that I grew up watching in the late 80s and early 90s, and it felt like such a joy to see these kinds of movies come back. I don't know if this is going to be a trend for action movies going forward, but there have been a couple of these that have come out in the recent, I would say, 8, 10 months or so. But I loved this movie. I love that Joe Carnahan is back doing what he does. It's been a long time since I've seen him. You know, uh, Everyone talks about Narc, Smoking Aces, which still doesn't get the due that it deserves. But the man knows how to do cop dramas. He knows how to do action. And what I didn't really expect was the thriller suspense aspect of it, almost like the mystery aspect of the movie. The premise of the movie is basically a team of cops find $20 million in a house cash. What are you going to do? And so, this whole moral dilemma and moral gray areas that come up throughout the movie, it's so gripping. And there's twists and turns in the writing, there's misdirection. You don't really know who to trust until basically the end. And it's just so well done, it's so well paced. And I just really, really love the dynamic between Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. They have such great chemistry, and it feels like I know in real life they've been friends since they were kids, but the brotherly back and forth between the two, I really, really liked it. It felt so real. At the same time, these guys are seasoned actors that have been doing this for a very, very long time. So you can see how all of their skills and all their experience in movies, whether it's directing, writing, acting, it all kind of came out in this movie, and it was such a pleasure to watch. I loved um, the action sequences because with the exception of like the fight in the end, there's a couple fights that are happening at the same time. Um, with the exception of that, everything else I think is just really well done. There's a shootout at the house that is really well done. There's a chase sequence that is also like you're on the edge of your seat saying, okay, so how's this going to turn out and how is this going to affect the story going forward? And it's so great. And the other aspect that I really enjoyed was the fact that it's based in Miami. I grew up in Miami in the 80s and 90s. And this was a very common story that I only really heard, in my preteen, teenage years. Because, as a, small child growing up, you really don't understand a lot of what's going on. You just see things and then you wonder about it. But then as you get older, you understand how it all kind of fits together. And I heard these stories constantly about whether it is corrupt cops stealing drugs and then selling it and taking the cash, or cops robbing money, like just physically just, busting drug dealers, letting them go, but taking their money and their drugs. And then, of course, in a situation like this, where stash houses and really they just stash money and they're found and then they take the money and then do whatever it is that they wanted to do with them. Uh, yeah, it was you heard you were almost surrounded by these stories, and then later on as an adult and I watched the documentary Cocaine Cowboys, then it's like, oh, you start putting the pieces together. Um, and it felt very, very real. And if when you watch the movie, it says inspired by true events. So like the storyline is not exactly true. These characters aren't real, but the situation that they're in is far too common. Was far too common. I can't speak for it now. I haven't lived in Miami in a long time. But this was a common thing that happened, and it felt real. It felt like even when they're driving to the house and you're seeing the neighborhood, I'm like, yep, that's Miami. That's the Miami Beach. That's the American Airlines Arena. I think they call it something else, but that's where the Miami Heat play, and it was all like very comforting in that way, and it just added to the investment by me, especially as an audience member. It's like, oh, I remember this, I remember that. This feels real. This is the story that I heard growing up. And yeah, I loved it. Now, my critiques are minor, I would say. I have only two main critiques. One I just mentioned earlier, it's the fight sequence that happens at the end, and it's a little too Jason Bourne-ish for me, where it's like a lot of cross-cutting, a lot of fast editing, and you really don't understand what's happening. I think now that we are in the post John Wick world, the audience members, they want to see what's happening, and they want some care. At least I know I do. I want some care and attention to detail put in these action sequences and fight sequences, so it kind of lends itself to the realism of the entire story. If everything is just happening, ba 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 ba, then it's like it takes me out of it. Sometimes, I remember the last Bourne movie, the Bourne Ultimatum. Well, not really the last, but in the original Bourne trilogy, with the Bourne Ultimatum, I remember having to leave the movie theater for a second because the the camera work and the editing just gave me a headache. So I got a bit of a flashback about that. And the other thing is more of a Netflix gripe because of, the whole phenomenon of the two screens where, people are watching the movie and on their phones at the same time. So the plot, the main premise of the movie has to be reiterated three, four, maybe even five times. And that got annoying to me. It was noticeable, and I don't want that. I'm old school. Look at my face. Look at my hairline. You know what I mean? I'm not a very, very young guy. I'm in my 40s at this point. And I came from a time where it's like before cell phones, before smartphones even, you sat, you watched the movie from beginning to end. So you were always engaged, you were always paying attention. And so having this constant reminder of what this movie is about, it was like, can you just stop? For people like me, it's annoying. But overall, this was a great movie. It was a fun time, and I love seeing these two guys back together again, making a movie with Joe Carnahan. Anyways, what about you guys? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Smash that like button, give me a follow, and I'll see you guys next time.